more? No, that's all. So, I hope you way back there were able to hear me. Okay. So if people have any questions or anything, I'd be happy to talk about my birth. Yeah, John.
Fantastic story, absolutely, really moving, fantastic story. How would you describe how much fiction and how much of personal journalism, if you call it, and amalgam that you put together from stories like that? Because it's obviously based on somebody who knew, right?
No, the character is not somebody I mean, there are different parts of the story. One is the pigeons, and when I was a kid, I raised pigeons, and at a time in my life that got very complicated, the pigeon coop was really my sanctuary. So when you talk about writing, which you know, I know pigeons. I was one of those people who didn't fight in the war. In my case, it would have been the Vietnam War. In fact, I refused induction. So for me, part of this was writing what I didn't know, but felt like I wanted to know. In the Vietnam War, I never saw the people who came back from the war as enemies. I saw them as victims and tools. And there, in fact, in the book, there are 3 stories that involve veterans. And I think it was my way to sort of work out to try to understand what veterans brought home from the different wars I wrote about and what they left in.
But some of the stories are about people that you knew, right? Not the fellow that made that?
Well,
But
there was a
that's
takeoff.
all
This was
fiction.
the first person who I had in mind of somebody I had met that was not an amalgam.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they're
right, yeah.
inspiration.
No, there's certainly seeds that are people I've met and voices that I'm not sure. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but
If you could speak up a little bit.
there's a way in which I don't need to know how real the stories are. It's your story, you put it together, and it's very moving.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wasn't meaning to belittle.
No, I didn't do that at all. And also, John's been in the
Wasn't a
military.
rebuttal. It's just
Make
me.
that clear.
Yeah.
In the introduction, when they were introducing you, they said you came to writing later in life. Could you tell us a little bit about that story?
So
How
the
you came to be writing?
question was that I came writing later in life, and could I talk a little bit about that? Yeah, I'm going to say something that's going to probably embarrass my son Jesse, which I'll never tire of doing.
Again.
I guess it was 18 years ago. I was in my 50s. I was camping with Jean Ann, who's here, my wife, and Jesse and his brother Seth, and we were up in the and with Irv and his family, who was here too. We were up in the Adirondacks, and I don't know if those of you who are parents have done this, but at different stages of my kid's life, I think about what I was doing at that age. And Jesse was 14 at that time and seemed very full of himself and very happy and typically, never mind. But but you know, and he was thriving. And I thought about my life at 14, and at 14 is when my life really fell apart, when my mother started being institutionalized in mental hospitals, and it just sort of, our whole story, our whole family imploded. So I started trying to think if there were other things in my life that I could remember about that 14th year, other than my mother's demise, really. Because that's all I could remember. And I started making lists on napkins when we were camping and eating in places and stuff like that, and came up with this whole list of many other things that were part of my life, and started writing about those. And that got me into writing. And it was sort of memoir writing, and I was really excited about learning the craft of writing. Then I started wanting to fudge, well, I could make this much more interesting if I could write. And that's no longer called memoir, that's in fiction, it's imperative you do that. So then I started writing fiction. That's sort of how I got going. Yes. Yeah.
I have a question, Mark.
Oh, this is a plant.
No, I really do. You really have a talent for voice, for sort of climbing into someone's perspective, no matter if you've had their experience or not. You know, a veteran, for instance. You know, how does that come to you? Does it come naturally? Does it come through research? You know, where do you start? Where do you find yourself drawn to the core of your stories?
You know, something I discovered when I started writing this is I realized I've been hearing all these voices, in the good sense, all my life and never sort of realized as I was recording them. And so when I started, I didn't have trouble, I had much more trouble with plot and sort of storyline and description than I did with voice, and that surprised me. The only person who I sort of really researched voice was Aaron, who was the preacher, the snake handling preacher, because that was again writing something I didn't know, although I lived in the South and been to a lot of Southern churches. So I went online and found out all the words that they use and found recordings of preachers preaching and stuff like that to try to get that voice right, because that wasn't a voice I knew.
Yeah.
Nunzio in this story was actually a student of mine in 1969 from South Philly, whose voice, I haven't seen him since 1970, and he was a student whose voice just I never forgot. And so that's in that story, one thing I said to myself was I will never use the word yo. But I didn't. Yeah.
I was so struck, I was so moved by, I guess, all the parallel eulogies that there were. The eulogy for Anthony and the eulogy for Nunzio, the eulogy for the Iraqis. And I wonder when you go to write a story like this, where that structure comes in. Do you develop that structure and then flesh it out? You know what I'm saying? Or does the structure arise organically from the story you're trying to tell?
So Joyce was asking how I come up with the structure of my stories. I guess it does come organically. Often I just start with an idea. One of the seeds of this story was in the Philadelphia Inquirer. This is a true piece of the story, that when they went into the desert of Iraq, all their detector systems crashed, and they really did use Rhode Island red chickens as backup, and had sentries and all that. All that was true, and when I saw that, of course I had to change it to pigeons, but you know, but the part about all that stuff is really true, and that was sort of the seed that sort of got me going. And then whatever it was about sort of my passion about pigeons when I was 14 to 16 years old sort of kicked in. And then I didn't know, all the stories I write, I don't know where they're going. And often they end up going in different trails, and I have to sort of figure out which one feels right. But I never sort of have a plot in mind. It's sort of the advantage of writing short stories, I think, versus novels. Yeah.
Right. Besides the voice, there's also place, and then the interaction between voice and place. And you know, having had the advantage of reading some of these before, that there's such a remarkable. There's a vastness of the humanity in the book. I mean, just so whether it's and an amazing amount of, like was said, of empathy and getting inside. I mean, whether it's the South Philly vet or the painters in Tlaxcala or the snake charmer. I mean, it's just but it's not a travelogue. I mean, and in some ways it's just beautiful how you make the painter in Tlaxcala kind of talk. There's this common thread, and it's just beautiful, the vastness of the humanity of it all.
That's powerful and moving.
J.A. says, It's time to stop. My wife wants to go home. She's
Marriages.
Mark, you need to
Yeah.
tell us where we can get your book.
The book is downstairs. I was hoping somebody would ask that.
And also, one really, if I may say, one really cool aspect of the book is that at the end of the book, Mark has this section called Story Seeds, where he talks about the seed for each story and where it began, and it's really beautiful. So you have to read the book to find that.